Welcome to the Grow As We Go podcast. I'm Sam, breathwork and embodiment coach, muse, and self-growth junkie.
And I'm Anthony, your co-host, transformational men's coach, and general question asker.
Here we create space for natural, vulnerable, and deeply connecting conversations on life as it happens, wisdom that I've picked up along the way, and tools to truly enjoy this beautiful life you've been given. I want to appreciate you for being here, whether this is your first time or you've been here since the beginning. We love feedback here, so leave your thoughts and takeaways from this episode in the reviews section of this podcast. This also helps the podcast become a bit more relevant in search reviews. Another way you can support this podcast is by following me on Instagram at Samantha__Charles and take a screenshot of this episode to share it on your social media and share your takeaways so that your junkie friends can come and get their fix too. Hello and welcome to another episode of Grow As We Go. I'm Sam and today we have Anthony and Renata.
Bye.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. Renata is a new friend to me and she's a really awesome individual and a mother and nutritional expert, and particularly like what I appreciate about the teachings that you offer is like that's how we met actually, was like you were sharing about women's hormonal health and like eating for that, and I'm just really getting into the ways of women being treated differently in like health and fitness and like the ways that we take care of our bodies, because we've lived in this very like patriarchal world and they've been everything's set up for the men, and so here we are changing the world. And yeah, I thought we would talk about like hormones and hormone health and whatever, we'll see where it goes. I don't really have an outline for this, but that's the style.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me.
Of course.
She like, if you didn't see it because you can't, this is a podcast, she like looks over at me like, are you ready to ask our first question? General question asker. Well, like I'm always ready to ask a question, but my first question is kind of like, what is it that got you in particular into this work?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I also want to keep saying Cranthony, which
you can feel free. It's what I've become called very frequently now. So
yeah, that's a really awesome question because, well, number one, the reason why I got started in nutrition was because when I had kids, my daughter Olivia, when she was an infant, she had a lot of gastrointestinal issues. And what we ended up realizing was it was related to allergies. And she was basically getting these allergies or the foods that cause the allergies in her body through the breast milk. So I ended up changing how I was eating and drinking in order to make sure she wasn't getting, and in this particular case, it was dairy.
Okay.
Over time, she was able to grow out of that. But when she's an infant and you're a sleep deprived, stressed out new mom, it's like anything that you can do to help your kid. And so that's what I was doing. And honestly, from there, I started to notice, well, actually, I feel really good too. Like my fatigue had decreased and my bowel movements were better and bloating was reduced. So I really started to notice the impact of reducing dairy for me, particularly at that time, because it was, many people don't know this as well, in the postpartum timeframe, which can be anywhere from when you deliver up to 4 to 7 years later, your gut is healing as well. So there's a lot of gut microbiome changes occurring. And especially for me, as someone from Asian descent, we generally speaking have less lactase, which is an enzyme to break down lactose from dairy. So this was part of the reason why I started getting into nutrition, because I saw the benefit not only for my daughter, but for me as well. So like huge deep dive into nutrition, huge deep dive into helping people at first with things like weight loss, right? Because a lot of people, especially right now, we're recording in January. So it's like important for so many people to have, a particular New Year's resolution around health, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
But what people don't often realize is that weight loss has a lot to do with your hormones. And
Mm.
specifically for us as women, if our hormones are not balanced for a variety of different reasons, we can get really significant PMS symptoms, which can be debilitating at worst,
Mm.
impact your relationships at worst, impact your mental health at worst. And these are just things that I felt like were very underrepresented in society. These are
Mhm.
things that we don't often talk about. And yet,
Sure.
women, and I know this from so many case studies, so many women that have come to me and said, literally, I went to my doctor and all they said was, well, you need to lose 30, 50 pounds. All you need to do is just do Weight Watchers or Whole30. There's not really an understanding of, hey, did something else happen hormonally that might have instigated, for instance, the weight gain or the
Mhm.
inability to lose weight, because so many women have that as well.
Mhm.
So this is really how I got started into it, because I just felt like there's something else going on. There has to
Mhm.
be a reason why. For some people, it's easy to lose weight, let's say. And for some women, it's really hard. And they might be doing everything right on paper, but it's still not working. And so
Mhm.
diving deep into hormones is what really started to make a lot of things click in my mind. And I wanted to share that with women.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's really cool. There's so much, there's so many like spider web things that we could go down. There's so many different roads, and part of me gets all excited about that, you know, like rain it in, Samantha. Um, but I, one of the recent podcast episodes, I was talking about this a little bit. I mean, it was like a little side tangent about like women's hormones and how there's so much that's like misunderstood about it because it's a very complicated system in comparison to like male hormone, and like the cycles that we're on is like a monthly cycle instead of a
Mhm.
daily cycle.
Mhm.
And you know, I think we had chatted just a little bit before this about birth control oftentimes being the like, here you go, here's your solution to all your problems, you know, and like
Mhm.
that it does, sure, like quote unquote solve some problems. Like I know it, women will lose weight on hormonal birth control. Women will also gain weight on hormonal birth control, you know, so it does different things for different people. But again, it's treated as this like one size fits all like solution to all
Mm.
kinds of hormonal imbalances. And the truth is, my understanding of it is hormonal birth control just like balances out your hormones instead of like, and equalizes it, you know, instead of it being the rhythm that we are meant to have. So it's actually not a balancing, it's like a flatlining, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the things that many women don't realize are number one, the side effects or potential side effects of birth control. There's lots of them. You know, I have shared this with you, I think previously, like having been on birth control for a number of years,
Mm.
you know, those particular side effects can occur way later. Like you might not
Right.
get them when you first begin taking them, because I do want to, you know, be somewhat open to both sides here. There are
Sure.
definitely some people that have benefited from having access to birth control, and that's wonderful. And there's also some people that have found over time there's some negative side effects to it, but they don't understand why. And
Mhm.
so part of it is being a really educated consumer and knowing, okay, you know, I'm starting to notice these symptoms. What could it potentially be caused by? And then being an advocate for your health to determine, okay, what can I actually do? Is birth control still right for me at this time? And perhaps the answer is no, or perhaps the answer is yes. But I agree with you. There's some really interesting findings that we continue to have about birth control. We do need to make sure we're sharing this information widely, because, you know, even now I was reading, you know, there are still males that think, oh, there's no side effects from birth control, because there's just not a lot of education given to males because they don't have to take it. Right.
That's accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember reading something about like they had created like a male birth control, and then so in the studies that they were doing, like they were complaining of all these different like side effects that they were having, and then so it didn't go to market. But like if you look at all the side effects, it's literally everything that like women deal with as their side effects, which is, and it's out there as if it's fucking candy, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. And it is, I've heard so many women come to me and be like, yeah, I have a very heavy period, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And my doctor just said, we'll just go back on birth control.
Yeah.
Right. So there, that can be great for some people.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to point out that that's not necessarily treating the root cause of the heavy
Exactly.
period. It's just treating the symptoms. So, we're, like you said, we're kind of stagnating the hormone levels. We're not actually, and this was my second point to what you mentioned earlier, like when we are on birth control, we're not truly getting a period. It's called
Right.
a withdrawal bleed. So that's why it might be lighter than what you might experience off of birth control. So for me, that makes total sense. If it's just a withdrawal from the hormones that are synthetic that I'm putting into my body,
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's going to be a little bit less or a lot less than what you might experience off of birth control. So these are things that women need to know, because I had a client last year. She went off of birth control, which was a huge, like, brave moment. And then she's like, whoa, like my periods are really heavy. And she went to her doctor and he was like, yeah, just go back on birth control. But it's not treating the root cause. And for her, the root
Yeah.
cause was understanding her high estrogen levels. Once we can balance that out, once we can reduce the estrogen and increase her progesterone, what happens? Periods are more normal, not as heavy. She's happier. There's so many benefits from understanding your hormones.
Nice.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so gosh, there's so many ways that you can take this. Do you have like a direction that you want to go, or you feel called to share? And then we can
Yeah. So I
I'm
love
already
talking.
naturally curious too about some things, but I will save
Oh,
my questions for later.
yeah, we'll have Cranthony Q&A later. Well, one of the things I love talking about is actually the stigmas associated with the menstrual cycle,
Yeah.
because they are far reaching. They pervade almost every single culture, community, country,
Mm,
and they start a long, long time ago. And
yeah.
sometimes some people don't even realize there are stigmas.
Right.
So, one of the things that I love, and I say that word loosely and in the sense of like being sarcastic, but one of the things I love is like when people say, "Oh, she's on her cycle, she's moody again." Like,
Yeah.
I feel
Ugh.
like it really downplays the emotional toll that women
Mm-hmm.
experience throughout their cycle and make it a joke, or make
Right,
it
right.
like something to feel shame around.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's a big problem for me.
Mm-hmm.
This is so ironic. I was literally having this conversation with my sister-in-law last night
Hmm.
about that same thing, right? Where it's like all this shame and like, oh, you're PMSing, or like, oh, are you about to start your period? You know, you're being a bitch, or whatever people say. It's like all
Mm.
these different things. And it's like,
Right. And so
God,
that's what
how
we
rude.
experience now. Yeah, you're totally right. Those are the things that we still, or others, say today. I have a big problem with that. But I want to mention that because it goes back so far in our history. And you can do a ton of research on this. But I think it's so interesting to look back. I think it was like in roughly 70 AD, there was some text written saying that women who menstruate will cause crops to wither and die, and
Huh.
bees to not pollinate flowers.
Huh.
And there was like, there's
Huh.
more text that's like, if a menstruating woman is likened to a creature that breathes poison, because apparently they do that when they menstruate. Who knew?
Interesting.
Yeah. And then even so, like, so that's in like really, really early times. But still, even now, there are particular terms in certain religions that refer to women who are menstruating as being unclean. And so I
Yeah.
just
Mm-hmm.
want to set the
Mm-hmm.
record straight on that. First and foremost, menstrual blood is as clean as any other blood from any other part of the body, of course, assuming you don't have any blood-borne pathogens, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And yet we still hear all the time about menstrual hygiene products.
Yeah, hygiene. That
Mm,
word.
right? Oh, I hate that word. Because
Or
there's
even like
there's nothing wrong with it.
vaginal hygiene products. It's like, do y'all not realize it's self-cleaning? It's a self-cleaning oven,
Guys,
okay?
yeah,
Self-cleaning oven.
which is the best kind of oven.
Exactly. I wouldn't want any other kind.
So we have that, right? But even so, like, I remember watching a TV show about an Italian family And then when they were making their annual like jarred marinara or jarred tomatoes, if you were a menstruating woman, you were not allowed to participate because it would make the marinara or the jarred tomatoes spoil.
Yeah. Well, I know there's like different things too in I could have this wrong, but I know that there's like different cultures where I mean think about like indigenous cultures where they sit in a teepee and they do overnight. I mean, I've been being participating in some of these like ceremony like peyote meetings where it's like overnight you sit all night and you pray and you sit in a teepee and there's drumming and all that stuff and there's a sweat lodge where you sit and in circle and there's a lot of I forget where I've got this knowledge from. Like I'd like to be able to quote it from something, but maybe somebody listening or maybe but like they wouldn't let women who are menstruating in on those ceremonies and stuff because they would mess it up or because it's unclean. Like there's a lot of different stories about it. And then like counterly, I've heard a lot of things where it's like, well, women are actually really wise and incredibly in touch and in tune during that time. Like I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast or not. I want to make a whole episode about like the menstrual cycle as well too, and in correlating it to like the seasons and then the women archetype too, where it's like winter is when you're bleeding and it's also the wise woman when you're like incredibly, it's like a death, right? And that's what winter is. It's a death and a hibernation and also like the start of something new and like a connection to something like greater for you to make plans for spring and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you're likening it to the seasons because I do agree there's a huge tie in there. But I think it's really important for women to understand the different seasons or phases of their cycle and understand also that when we are in that spring, summer, it's that growing, it's that becoming more extroverted, it's becoming more external to self versus when you're in that fall, winter season, it's the coming back into self, becoming more introverted, really coming back to look more within. And so that perfectly aligns with what you're saying regarding
Right.
like the female archetypes as well.
Yeah. I think that it's really interesting because this is a part of the conversation yesterday with my sister-in-law was like I don't even remember the terms. There's like the luteal and the menstrual and ovulate. Like I know the terms, but I can't remember what like the luteal and follicular, like which side of the thing that's on. But I know, the seasons and I know what that is. And it really helped me like have a deeper understanding of what was going on internally too, because we all experience the seasons and like super relatable and like understandable like what's going on during those times. Like you learn about that at a really young age, and so like doing that correlation was much easier for me than like the scientific terminology or whatever.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but so you were talking about um the
Stigmas.
stigmas and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's important for us to recognize these stigmas. And we talked about how some of the older ones seem really ridiculous. I mean, would you agree? They sound
Yeah.
kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
Definitely.
But also, these stigmas still exist today. And perhaps they don't seem ridiculous to us now, but maybe in 30, 50, 100 years, someone else will look back and think, wow, that
Right.
was
Like, what was
ridiculous.
wrong with those people thinking like that?
Yeah.
Right? Because, like, I believe that there have been some politicians that have said that menstruating people don't think as well as non-menstruators. And, like, okay, I think for several people, that sounds ridiculous now. So I just want to point out how these stigmas have occurred through time and to also note the damage that this can have, even if you don't necessarily think it's ridiculous sounding now, it is having an impact. That's why we have girls that are hiding that they are getting their periods.
Right.
Yep.
That's why we have girls that literally will use toilet paper for a year because they don't want to tell their moms that they have their cycle.
Yeah.
And, in addition to that, so many girls, either at schools or wherever they may be, don't have access to period products. So then we have the added pressure of, well, how am I going to get period products? I don't have enough money. I don't know where to get them from. I feel uncomfortable talking about it. Imagine the pressure on a young girl who's already going through hormonal changes to try to deal with that. So there's a lot of things that we can do better in society to just make it easier for women to feel comfortable, number one, talking about the menstrual cycle,
Mm-hmm.
and number two, not making it something that needs to be looked down upon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember being like, opening the package to my tampon in the bathroom. Like if somebody else was in there, in the stall next to me, I'm like really,
Like
really quiet.
super
Like God
slow.
forbid somebody in the women's restroom hear me opening a tampon package. Like what?
Right.
Why? Why is that so embarrassing?
Mm.
Yeah, because we've been taught that it's one of those things that you hide. I mean,
Right.
look at marketing. It's like, be discreet.
Mm-hmm.
The pattern on this tampon or panty liner or pad looks like something else. So you don't have to like
Mm-hmm.
flash it around that it's for your menstruation phase. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many things that make us think, oh, don't talk about it. It's something to be
Mm-hmm.
hidden.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, there's another side of it that I remember, being in relationship and like it being like as an adult and it being like in a sexual relationship and it's like, nope, no sex during a period. And not because I didn't
Um,
want it, but it was like because that's dirty or it's gross or it makes a mess, we had to clean it
Yeah.
up and da 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 da. And I remember partners saying, like, well, blood is like where not bacteria, but like where diseases, like bloodborne diseases. And I'm like, dude, if if that's true, you already have it,
right.
like,
Exactly. You haven't connected the dots of the math
yeah,
ain't
but it's
mathing,
just
dude.
it's like what you were talking about too, like blood's dirty and like
Mhm.
and all of that, but it's like not just blood, but like period blood specifically is
Exactly.
more
Yeah.
dirty for some reason
Yeah.
because it
Exactly.
doesn't come, I don't know, it's so interesting, right? Like you could fall and be gushing blood and people are like, oh, rushing to help you, like obviously with
Yeah.
your hurt, but they're not like, "Whoa."
Yeah. Some people are weird
Totally.
about blood just in general, but
That's
not
true. That's a
about,
different story.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even so, like for instance, this week I had a consultation with a woman, and I want to point this out specifically because this is how we start changing the conversation around women's hormonal health and specifically for women who experience vaginosis. So
Mhm.
that's meaning bacterial infections or
Mm.
yeast infections that occur in and around the vagina area. So imagine having vaginosis. If anyone has never experienced before, which I want to say like 75 to 80% of women experience it at some time in their
Mm.
I've
lives.
had it.
Yeah, I've had it too. So it's very common,
Hmm.
right? Have you ever had a conversation about vaginosis before? Sam,
Before what?
before this today, right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel
Is
like
it
I'm
a
probably
common
pretty rare about
conversation?
it.
Yeah. Yeah. But maybe,
It's not like a dinner table conversation.
right. You're
Hey, have you
probably
had
not
vaginosis
like,
lately?
yeah, like, oh my gosh, you guys, let's talk about vaginosis. It's probably not something you're talking about on a daily basis. Is that fair to say?
No, no, yeah.
Or like a
I've never
monthly
even heard that word
basis?
before. And so
Oh, interesting.
That's
unsurprising, I guess.
good. Yeah. Okay. So, point is that many women don't talk about it, especially because the symptoms associated with it are things like itching, redness, swelling, at worst, odor, like a fishy smelling odor or a discharge like cottage cheese, or it could be a clear fluid as well. So, the reason why I want to bring this up is imagine having recurring vaginosis.
Mm.
And imagine then you have to go to a doctor who's, let's say, male, talking about this condition that's occurring. And it can feel, as I'm sure you can imagine, really embarrassing. Or
Yeah.
perhaps you feel like ashamed. I mean, this particular woman told me her husband thought that she was stepping out on their marriage because she was getting
Yeah.
it.
Mm.
I want to point out this was not the case because what we determined was it was related to hormones. So
Mhm.
For
obviously,
sure.
with a major hormonal change, which she'd had a baby over a year ago, Huge hormonal changes occurred while she was pregnant. And this was actually the onset of the vaginosis. Now, what happened was, even after she delivered, like we talked about before, in that postpartum era, hormones are constantly changing, where your body is trying to regulate itself. And if we're not giving it tools like nutrition and holistic therapies, it can make it even more difficult to regulate. So for her, she's continuing to struggle with this vaginosis. And the doctor says, well, just take this pill. Just take this pill and the symptoms will go away. So did the symptoms go away? Of course. But then what happened the next month?
It comes back.
And the next month.
Keeps coming back.
Yeah. So this is why it's so important for us to be able to talk about even these things that women are experiencing, whether it's vaginosis or otherwise, that might feel a little bit embarrassing at first. But if we're not talking about it, how are women going to get to the root of the problem instead of just treating the symptom?
Yeah. I think it's so timely because I had the podcast episode about like releasing shame for better sex and freedom. And it's like all of this stuff where I talked about a lot of this stuff too. And that's a lot of my like what I do with the yoni castings. It's like releasing shame from your body. And like the vagina is the most shamed part of any human anatomy. Like, you know, guys don't have that same stuff that to deal with. And I mean, just, you know, as a society, like generally speaking, sure, there's some like, anyway, but like, I just, it's the shame of it all, you know. And it's like, if we can just talk about things. And even in that episode I was sharing about sex shame and having shame around sex, and it's because it's such a hush hush thing, and like, oh, we don't talk about that, and it's for different reasons that we don't talk about that than this what you're speaking about. But it's all the same thing, you know. And how do you educate, or how do you grow out of that without talking about it?
Exactly.
And making it like normalizing that conversation and normalizing the experiences as well.
Yeah, 100% agree. There's so much shame that I think women are carrying around for lots of different reasons. And if we can alleviate that even just a little bit with what the work that you're doing, which is incredible, talking about hormonal health, talking about the menstrual cycle, like this is like the door opening for so many women to just start feeling more comfortable with their bodies.
For sure. And one of the things that I've heard Anthony say a lot, and I kind of like picked it up as my own in a way too, where it's like the antidote to judgment is curiosity. And I feel like because like shame happens because there's judgment, you know. And so if we could be more curious and have more conversations like we're speaking about, then that lightens the load on the shame, you know. And so then there's not so much judgment, and like, why, like so much judgment around the vagina, you know, like why does it smell like that, why does it have this fluid coming out of it, why does it change colors, why is it like the fluid change colors?
Oh, thank goodness.
You got a chameleon in there.
different conversation for that one.
But yeah, I mean, to what you're talking about with, and all these like stigmas too around like the vaginosis thing, and like having it smell like it smells different at different times, or like if you have, you know, some sort of hormonal imbalance, then there's like that thing, and there's the I know that there's like a stigma around that smell. Like if you smell like that fishy kind of smell, then it's like, oh, you're a slut. I remember that being like really like, I learned that in high school, you know. It's like, oh, she sleeps around and she smells like that. And I was like, what, you know. And then whenever I got it one time, I'm like freaking paranoid about like, can people smell me, like I don't want anybody down there, and like I'm gross, and just it just being a whole like physical experience and also mental experience. It's crazy.
Yeah. I think I also want to mention, you know, because I have had many women come to me talking about various forms of vaginosis. Part of the difficulty too is not just for us as women that want to shed light on it, but also in order to get the treatment that you need. So, you know, going off of, you know, what I mentioned previously, I had another client where she literally has been having vaginosis for years.
Oh gosh.
Years. And the only reprieve she would get from the symptoms would be during her bleed phase, during her menstruation phase.
Mm.
So imagine 3 weeks roughly out of the month, you are experiencing these terrible symptoms. And she's going, like, she's an advocate, which is awesome. Like, she's going to doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor, no help whatsoever. She literally told me the last doctor she went to was like, I've seen these symptoms before. That was what they said to her, for real.
Never seen.
I've never seen this before.
Wow.
Yeah. And so imagine the level of frustration that she's experiencing. But the reason why I want to bring that up is because the reason why we need to be advocates, the reason why we need to voice what's happening to us is because we need to find more doctors like the very last doctor this client went to, who then said, yes, I've seen this before. This is what we can do to help it. And she was a woman, an older woman who'd been in practice for a long time, had a lot of experience with this. So we need to have more doctors that are open and willing to dive deep into these conversations, refer people out to others that might be able to help them, because otherwise we just keep suffering. And that's where the system is failing us.
Yeah. And I think too, it ties into the like pill for an ill mentality that I feel like the United States has as a culture and within our medical system. It's like, oh yeah, here it'll treat the symptoms. And again, like I've seen this rise in root cause, looking for the root cause of things instead of like just whack-a-moling your symptoms, and it's like, so okay, you treat this symptom with that pill, but then that has a cascading effect on various other, like our bodies are this like a beautiful complex system that like whenever you, I mean, I was in veterinary medicine, and so I learned a lot about like the way that medicine works and like how these medicines affect the parts of your body. And I mean, it's the same in us as it is the animals that I was learning about, like we're all animals in the end of the day, but like whenever you're taking a pill for something, you're shutting down the way that your body naturally works in a certain aspect. And so instead of like tracking it back of like, okay, what's actually out of alignment here and how can we fix that, instead of just like, again, the whack-a-mole of symptoms. And to your effect of the example of her getting relief, and then next month it's not, because you're not treating the root cause of things. And I appreciate the hormonal aspect. And I think there's so many, like there's so much that goes into like dis-ease, there's so many different ways that you can approach that. Like hormonal health is definitely like more of a root cause consideration. And then there's like, I definitely am a believer of the like the body keeps a score, and our mental power of our mind and the way that affects and trauma and all those different things that we're dealing with, how that can affect our bodies. And that, I mean, I could talk about that forever, but anyway.
It's funny. Because you get a podcast.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious too, like for Cranthony/Anthony, like what is your impression of the menstrual cycle?
Impression. Okay. Well, you are talking to someone who, has Sam as a partner. So that has a very different, I understand different phases, right? So I know there's a follicular phase, an ovulation phase, a luteal phase, and a menstrual phase. Or it's not called, what's the last one?
Yeah, menstruation.
Is it called?
Yeah.
Okay, menstruation.
Good job.
So I do know that there's things.
You passed.
Yeah.
Not the correct order, but you passed.
Wait, it's not the correct order?
No, that was the correct order. Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah, follicular is first.
Oh, I failed. No, because it's like
Follicular is before ovulation, right? And then luteal is the longest one in between.
Luteal is before
ovulation.
menstruation.
I thought you said differently. Anyway.
Oh, that's okay. And there you go. Okay, cool. Listen to the last episode if you want to do that.
I heard that differently.
But yeah, and it does kind of relate to the female, the women cycle, like when it comes to spring, summer, fall, and winter. And that there's like the maiden, whether it's like in the spring, there's a lot of energy, right? And so in the follicular phase, it's like a lot of let's build, let's create. And then the ovulation phase is like summer, and it's the summer of love, right? It's the time where naturally, that's when women are fertile, the ability to bear children, and you have that, and not just the ability, like obviously it happens a little bit before too, but that's really when women can get pregnant. And then in the luteal phase, it's like, okay, we're going into fall. So it's like the slowdown. And it's funny that you ask, like, well, ask about the cycle. There's like a particular tracking that I look at in her when it's kind of a joke, but she'll be like, I'm tired of love. Like I'm, I have reached my limit of being loved. And especially like a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Like strong or at least
Well, it's
forward
it's
way.
the wild woman
Right, right,
and
right.
the fall and
Yeah,
the emotional like turmoil in a way,
right.
and that's that like PMS
Well,
sort of thing.
but
I mean,
then
you don't talk about it like
right,
that,
right,
but that's
right,
what's happening,
right. And this is really what I'm just aware of that and hold space for it. And then
Right.
the menstruation cycle is there's pain and there's also wisdom and there's also like clearing,
Hmm.
making room for new things. And so you're thinking about getting rid of. And so there's a lot of like ritual in the way that we understand her moon and pay attention to that, and like it's on her calendar for when it happens. And so like, however, if you would have asked me this question but poorly 2.5 years ago, I would have been like, I mean, I hear it's not great and it's just kind of my job to make her comfortable when it happens, but I wouldn't have known about the whole cycle, right? So all I would have known is that there's a 3 to 7 day period, depending on the woman, and you just give them space. And like that would have been my description, right? So I've been not highly, I've been way more educated in this, I think, because of who I'm connected to and because of like being sent resources by Sam and by others in this world. Um, but that's my understanding, and that's what I know now. And also like specific things for Sam. And like, I know she likes Brookside chocolate, so those also help.
But that helps all people
Right.
every day. Yeah.
I think this goes so again, it's like so timely the conversation where and I want to create a frame. Maybe you and me could talk about this another time, but like I'd love to create some sort of framework around
Sorry,
this
not you,
because
Anthony.
yeah, I mean, well, we can all the three of us could all do it actually
Sweet.
because I told you I want to talk about this
Yeah.
more and just have like a framework of an understanding for myself, but then also to like share with other women because the the cycle is so I mean, as I've gotten more in tune with paying attention to my
Hmm.
personal cycle,
Hmm.
paying attention to the moon cycle, paying attention to the season that we're in also, and
Hmm.
like becoming more in tune to the rhythm as opposed to, I mean, before I made a post about this and it's going to be in the podcast about like anything you can do, I can do better, where it's like growing up in this world of equality and all, like which is great. And I had a certain experience with that where it's like, okay, equality means we're the same, and I need to be balanced the way that men are and
Hmm.
not have this hormonal cycle. And I remember like priding myself on being balanced and not having that like PMSing phase where like
Hmm.
I was even keel throughout my whole cycle. And so as I've gotten more in tune with it, I am not even killed. And it's like, whoa, and often the female and feminine energy is equated to water and the ocean
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
particular because they're and then it's like a term of endearment. He calls me my ocean. And it's like the depths and the calmness and the chaos, and it's like it's so
The
perfect.
waves and the tide and how
It's
it's
so
affected
perfect.
by the moon. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's so
Mm.
perfect to me and I love that analogy, but I think about like, okay, as you're going through the swells and like the storming seas that are that fall phase, or what is that, follicular? um
Wait,
The
is it,
luteal.
it's luteal,
luteal.
damn it. So the luteal phase or the wild woman or the fall, it's like I don't have my sea legs, like it's just
Mm.
a little chaotic.
Hmm.
And but anyway, I think that also there's a way that there's a lot of wisdom coming up in there, and
Hmm.
our emotions are like um keys,
Yes.
and like pointers and gifts if we can see them that
That's
way.
it. There's gifts in the chaos, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
the point is not to subject chaos waters to order, but to see the beauty in the chaos. And
Mm,
that that language around chaos waters is also like primordial speak. Like there's stuff that goes back to like some of the first creation narratives that talks about how basically every creation narrative was some sort of way to put order to the chaos waters
Mm.
instead of embracing it. And in
mm,
almost every one of those, except for the Hebraic or the the Hebraic culture, uh, it is to put to death the woman goddess who's responsible for that. And so instead of doing that, what does it look like to instead incorporate, integrate, and understand that like the chaos waters are not forever, that they
yeah.
are a cycle and they're actually something really wonderful for the world and necessary for creation.
Mm.
Mm, so true. I love
Wow.
that. So I
And it
want
brings
to
up a
point
lot of
out,
stuff in me. It's great.
yeah,
I love her chaos. And I'm like, man, that's a whole lot I got to reflect on now.
right. Yeah. It brings up the stuff in you that you need to heal
Yeah.
or
Right.
contemplate, reflect
Which is
And like
upon.
within
beautiful.
the relationship too.
Mhm.
And I mean, that can be a conversation for another time, but just that framework of it being like a gift and an opportunity to like, okay, what needs to be reassessed here? What things are
Mhm.
coming up so that we can reassess what's actually not working,
Mhm.
and then release and let go with the moon
Mhm.
and our bleeding, and then rebuild.
Yeah. For me, this really brings up because you talked about the chaos, we've talked about the pain, we've talked about, the bleed phase having all these quite negative connotations. But I
Mm,
also want to just emphasize one thing that Anthony said, which was around the release. And I know so many women that look at their bleed phase as an inconvenience, as
yeah.
Mhm.
annoying, frustrating, and I get it. I definitely used to think the same thing. It's important for me to share that I want to liken that phase to like when you have a really good cry. Like,
Mhm.
Yeah.
when the world has been like really on you and you just like, I just need to cry and let this go. And you feel so much better
Mhm.
after that good cry. Like, I want to liken that to the menstruation phase. We need to release, we need to let go of everything the prior cycle brought with it, both good and bad, so that we can create space for
Mhm.
new things to grow, not just the uterine lining, but also
Mhm.
for in life, like what
Right.
projects, what creativity, what fertility in our whole lives are we
Mhm.
bringing in? And we can only do that after we've released.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think too, there's an aspect of like making a ritual out of it,
Mhm.
and making it sacred and making it more enjoyable, I guess, because there are some, I mean, I've not personally had to deal with a lot of the physical intense symptoms that I know,
Mhm.
I had a friend where it was like debilitating for her when she would have her cycle, and I'm like, Jesus, that would suck. But
Mm.
it's like I wonder if there is more permission and more understanding and more curiosity around it all, and like for there be for there to be permission to rest during the times and
Mhm.
not having to, again, continue on, be even keel and like day to day, like the patriarchy and the man cycle, or the male cycle, where it's like, no, this is a time for rest, and that's
Mm.
it's like the Sabbath, it's holy.
Mm.
Yeah,
Love that.
yeah, yeah, I love that. Yeah, this idea of making it a sacred ritual or practice is huge.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so many people don't think about it that way, especially because
Right.
we're brought up in society of go, 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 productivity,
Right.
productivity,
Right.
productivity, ignore how you feel, all that
Mhm.
kind of thing. And so I definitely believe that slowing down is going to be hugely productive, actually, for the other parts of your cycle.
Mhm.
Because
Right.
just like the divine oceanic feminine, like a wave going in and out towards the shore,
Mhm.
in order for us to go towards the shore, we need to recess and come back into self,
Right.
which is
Yeah.
that menstruation phase, that internal
Right.
focus.
Yeah. And it sounds like there's a lot of consciousness, like conscious menstruation, right? Like
Yeah.
conscious cycle. And that that consciousness. I was reading How to Be the Love You Seek,
All
which
right. Oh, what a
y'all
great
have a,
book.
I know it's fantastic. Y'all have a really good book club around it. About how consciousness simply just means to notice, not to think, right? Not to like, oh, this is happening or this is happening to my body. So let me think through that instead of just being like, oh, I'm aware of that and noticing that and seeing that and how that would even simply change like the way that anyone interacts with the menstruation cycle, especially like as I think about working with the men that I work with, being able to educate them around this too and say, what does it look like to be able to create space for the divine feminine in your life on her cycle instead of on your time frame when it's convenient for you.
Yeah. When I think
Yeah,
about like for for men to have an understanding of the cycle as well
Hmm.
and the benefit of that, and not just the bleeding part,
Right. The
like the
whole.
whole cycle, and being aware and being in tune with that, and how supportive that is to have that in partnership for both.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I wanted to highlight based upon my question to Anthony earlier is that you showed that growth. Like you showed
Hmm.
that there was a time you didn't have a lot of understanding
Yeah.
around the female menstrual cycle and what it meant to you, especially in relationship. And
Hmm.
you showed that there's growth possible.
Absolutely.
Because I do think sometimes, we get stuck in this thought that, well, no, we can't change. And especially
Ooh.
if you're partnered with someone that does experience the menstrual cycle,
Hmm.
especially if they are having PMS symptoms of some kind, or at worst, PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, when PMS
Hmm.
symptoms are heightened like 1,000,000%, and
Hmm.
it is suffering, it is harming
Hmm.
your relationships and mental health. There is a space there where we can actually come into relationship and build more compassion,
That's
build
right.
more connection by understanding each other
Hmm.
on a deeper level. And part of that is what you guys have already done, which is communication
Hmm.
Hmm.
around cycles and what you need and what the other needs and how you can
Hmm.
support each other through the tides of life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And what would the world look like if we had more people who were open to that? And I think that's why you wanted to start the podcast in the first place is, yeah, there's always room for growth, even in something as seemingly not that big a deal to guys as the menstruation cycle, the whole entire thing. And I just, it sounds like the world that you're creating, Renata, opens women up to being able to talk openly about their hormones, their cycle. And I was just thinking in my head very earlier on in the episode, and I was like, I have questions, but I'll ask later. Was like, it's the thing that came to my mind was it's not your job to educate me about this stuff. Like I should be able to do the work on my own. And I'm still curious about the hormones and I'm curious about how estrogen and progesterone, is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Like work and what kind of impact they have on the body and things like
Yeah.
that. So like I now am open to a whole new level of like, ooh, I get to learn more things. Like I'm super excited
yeah.
about that.
And that's really awesome. So I want to commend you on that. In addition, I think it is important for all males to be curious.
Hmm.
Like they might not
Absolutely.
dive into it as deeply as you have or you will, but understanding that there are different hormones that affect women in different ways. Not to say
Hmm.
that men don't have estrogen and
Right.
progesterone, because they do.
Right.
It just affects you in different ways.
Yeah.
Similarly, women have testosterone, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's about understanding how do our bodies work differently with
Hmm.
these hormones. Now, in addition, there are lots of other hormones in the body,
Right.
right? There's tons of them:
Cortisol, dopamine, all
cortisol,
the fun things.
serotonin, dopamine,
Yeah.
oxytocin. There's so many cool hormones to learn about.
Hmm.
And for me, once you learn about it, like knowledge is power, right?
Yes.
So
Thank you,
we
Schoolhouse Rock.
actually, yeah, the only thing I learned from that. No, just kidding. But it's really empowering for your health journey, whether you're someone that menstruates or not, because it
Hmm.
allows you to have a deeper understanding of what's going on internally, even though you might
Hmm.
not necessarily witness a physiological change.
Mm. So how have you seen specifically the benefits of like mental health? Since you said not just physiological change, yours or clients of yours, how their mental health changed once they became open and aware and understanding of their hormones and if they're a menstruating person, their cycle.
Yeah, great question. So I have a client that came to me last year, and so she did have PMDD, which, like I mentioned
Mm,
before, was when your PMS symptoms are super heightened. We called it her ragey phase right before her period started because the rage was intense. The
wow.
rage was such that with her children, with her partner, it was
Wow.
damaging their
Mm,
relationships.
Mm.
And so I want to point this out because I think it's really relatable. Like, I think, uh, hands up if you're a woman that hasn't felt rage before her period started. Yeah. So, we talked about that. We talked about why it was occurring. We talked about its relation to how hormones were changing in the body. And one of the very, very simple things that she did was simply to start seed cycling. I think, Sam, you know about seed
That's
cycling.
how we met. Yeah, you were doing it was like at the free period underwear. This FRI, not
Correct.
FR, it's FRI period. They have reusable underwear
Correct.
for your cycle. And then you were doing like a little side talk about seed cycling and the benefits of that. Yeah, that's how we met.
Yeah. So seed cycling is a holistic way of balancing your hormones through food. And literally, it's just adding a couple of seeds into what you're eating every
mm,
single day. The seeds are selected based upon number one, how they affect hormones, and
mm,
number two, how your hormones are changing during the cycle. So
mm.
literally, that's all she did. She just added in a couple of seeds every single day. And within 2 months, we came back, regrouped to see how she was feeling. She literally said to me, "You know what? I'm on my period right now. I had no rage."
Wow.
And that's
Nice.
in a really short space of time.
That's
And
amazing.
that's after who knows how long of feeling that rage, not knowing where it's coming from, not knowing what to do with it,
Mm,
relationship damaging, all of that kind of thing that can be occurring for so many women.
mm,
And if something as simple as seed cycling could help that, like like you said, imagine how the world would be different.
yeah. Mm.
Yeah. Do you have like a protocol for that or some links that we would put in the description for people that might be interested in learning more? Or I don't know if you want to get into that.
Yeah, so I have a freebie that I give away usually when I'm at things like the workshops talking about nutrition for the cycle. And so that's a really simple downloadable that I can share with you that talks about the 4 different phases of the cycle, the seed cycling for each phase, and other foods you can choose to incorporate.
Mm.
So all the foods that I talk about are going to support your hormone balance, as well as aid things like your gut health, your liver health, etc. But it's a really super easy cheat sheet that you can keep in your purse or on the fridge or like a digital copy so that when you go to the grocery store and you're like, oh, like what vegetables should I get this week? Go
Yeah.
back to understanding, okay, what phase of my cycle am I in? Let me pick one of these foods or grab these seeds and start incorporating it on a daily basis. So I can share that with you for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I can put that link in the show notes or the link to so they can however that works.
Yeah.
The magical internet.
Doo-doo-doo.
Yeah, that's a really awesome resource, I think,
Mm.
for everybody,
Yeah.
for all the women that have cycles and creating balance throughout it. And that's a really oh, we're talking about carrots also.
Yeah.
And that's probably like a random thing, but if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. So Sam DM'd me the other day and she was like, okay, do you know about carrots and the menstrual cycle? And I was
Oh.
like, yes.
I know about both of those things individually.
And interestingly enough, together. So, well, so the reason why it came up is because you were experiencing a particular PMS symptom. Do you want to share what that was?
Yeah, well, I just like my breast would be sore the week
Right,
before.
Mhm.
Yeah.
right. So, breast tenderness can be a symptom related to high estrogen.
Mm.
So, basically, estrogen is a growth hormone, right? So, if you've ever been pregnant, Frankly, I know you have. Yeah.
Once or twice.
So estrogen is supposed to increase to help the baby grow, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, if you're not pregnant, we want estrogen to come down right before your bleed phase begins. However, if your estrogen levels are high, then it's going to manifest itself in some various symptoms, such as breast tenderness, amongst potentially other things too. So what's cool is that cruciferous vegetables or things like carrots can be really helpful for the additional fiber to help to eliminate that excess estrogen through the bowel movements. So in addition to carrots, but it's also for gut health. So we want to be having regular bowel movements. We want to be making sure we're getting enough fiber. Carrots are an awesome way to do that. But other cruciferous vegetables, in case you don't like carrots, are things like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, soy, that kind of thing. It's just super helpful for detoxifying the body as well as eliminating that excess estrogen.
Yeah. I know that there's like a lot of other stuff too. I mean, hormone balance is a huge topic. I feel like nutrition is a huge thing that goes into it. And also you get to think about like, I remember going on learning about the hormonal cycle and all of that in my like non-toxic journey, and like learning about all these different like toxins that are in your freaking laundry detergent and like in the clothes even that we wear on our body all day, and like your skin is your biggest organ and it absorbs all that stuff, and just how there's so many toxins that are in our environment, in our air, in our water, in our food, and just makeup and hair products. And like it continues, goes on and on and on. And women, we use a lot of those products that affect our hormones in a way where we have this estrogen dominance. And I think that I remember learning a lot about estrogen dominance being, because of food we eat and because of the things we put on our skin and our hair, and like exposing ourselves to all these toxins that wreak havoc on our endocrine system, which is the hormonal, system, if you're not familiar with that. But I know you are, Renata, but somebody listening. And just how estrogen dominance is typically what causes a lot of the, less favorable symptoms in our cycle.
Yeah. Those endocrine disruptors, which is what you're talking about,
there you go, that's the word,
have a huge, huge impact to our hormonal health. And many women might not even realize that yet. Like you mentioned, endocrine disruptors can be in so many things, in plastic, in the cookware you're using, in, the drink bottle you're using. It can be, something that you might be breathing in without even realizing it. It might be in your water supply. There's so many things, and not to scaremonger, it's really to help educate people.
right?
So simple things like water filters might be a great place to start, or looking for locally sourced produce as opposed to ones that might carry a lot of pesticides, come from halfway around the world, might not be at their peak nutritionally anyway. There are various things that we can do to start eliminating some of these endocrine disruptors from the things that we're interacting with on a daily basis. I also want to point out one other thing, is that endocrine disruptors can really impact different races differently too. And this is something not often talked about.
Yeah.
So I want to point this out because, especially for women of color, so Black women, brown women, women of color, generally speaking, are more heavily marketed to for products that contain more endocrine disruptors.
Okay.
And so there are studies, like I read this completely tragic study about how a particular company realized that their product contained, I want to say it was arsenic.
Oh, no.
I'm not sure if it was that particular compound, but basically something really damaging to the body. And it was used by a lot of Black women in communities.
Oh, okay.
So what did they do? They doubled down on the marketing
no.
of, So there are some studies that show that I think it's like 4 times. So white women, generally speaking, have 4 times as much access to products that do not contain endocrine disruptors than colored or women of color do. And so this is something else that we need to be cognizant of as we move forward, because like we're having a really great conversation right now, but how can we make sure everyone's in on this conversation? Like people that might not necessarily know anything about this. And part of it is sharing tidbits. Part of it is sharing the podcast episode, sharing resources with women that might have never heard of this before.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
really important to get the message out, especially for women of color.
Yeah. And working at a public school, like I'm not saying that that qualifies me for anything in particular, but I do see a lot of young women of color in school, and the way in which education is handled in that environment. And my school is even one of the ones that has a kind of balanced population of people of color, and then white people, is that there, that if that education where I'm at isn't great, then imagine schools in like urban areas. And I mean, they're perpetuating, and so there's very little education around that, and it's just consume, consume, consume as much as you possibly can. And it was mind-blowing and groundbreaking when we were able to give free food and lunches to kiddos, but a lot of that food, again, no one's considering the gut health of the poor Black girl. That's not what people are thinking of. And so to think about how, you know, the power that we have really in sharing information is so important to gift and support every person that we can come into contact with. And yet also it's like, well, what kind of um, information that we can get to the young gals in school. It's like, well, I don't know how much they'd love to listen to their teacher's podcast, but I can try.
Well, and you bring up an excellent point, because we all have children here. This is not just
Right.
important for girls, it's important for boys to
Yes,
learn.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's more for
And
everyone. Yeah.
yeah, it's for everyone. And so what I personally would love to see, because I don't know about you guys, but when we did sex ed at school, it was like, this is a penis, this is a vagina. It wasn't
Right.
like, these are the phases of your cycle, this is
Right.
why you feel the way that you feel.
Right.
In addition, there's not talk on, this is the male hormonal cycle,
Right.
this is why you feel the way that you do.
Right.
And so I personally would love to see more education on this for our children,
Yeah.
because that's
As
where we start. That's
it's
how we
true.
stop those stigmas that we talked about at the beginning, because
Mhm.
they're educated, they have knowledge about
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, I think that'd be really obviously impactful and transformational to like bring that aspect of um health and sex education as a
Mhm.
part of that, like for men, for the boys and the girls to
Yeah.
both learn like and have an awareness and understanding of the cycle,
Yeah.
and how that affects you, how the
Mhm.
hormones affect you. Because I mean, even learning about like dope, like all the hormones, they
Right.
all have an effect on your emotions and the way that you feel, and then in turn the way you think and the decisions that you make and the choices that you make, and like it's just a whole fucking thing,
Mhm.
and the more that you know and you learn and you understand about it, then it's like you have this awareness that's like, again, knowledge is power,
Mhm.
and so you can like, oh, maybe I'll make a different decision, or oh, maybe I'll wait a little bit before I'm like in this emotional state to make a huge decision or something.
Yeah. Or maybe I won't call someone out because they're feeling emotional right now.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and having compassion and empathy,
Right.
and like, yeah, it would be really interesting to have that in schools too. I think about just like the, yeah, I don't know,
Well,
it's like it could go really good, and it could also like be pretty damaging. Like I could see it kind of going either way
yeah,
depending
like
on like,
using that information as one thing or the other instead of as like a compassionate resource to be like, oh, well, you're on your luteal. Like I can
well, I
imagine
don't
there
even
being
know
like
if it would
weird
be,
teasing,
yeah, maybe some like
but
it's just like increasing their vocabulary in order
yeah,
to, it
I
just
don't,
would
I
totally
don't know.
depend on the people, the kids
Yeah,
in the class, and
exactly.
that
Well, we can
dynamic.
use our own kids
But
as little guinea pigs.
yeah.
We'll do that. My daughter's about to turn 10. So it's about time, right, to start introducing some of these conversations into her mix, because it happens really soon, and it's so easy to just let misinformation spread, and then all of a sudden she comes to you and she's like, there's like a demon living in my uterus, and you're like, oh gosh, okay, I gotta undo this now.
Yikes. Just to set the record straight, no demons in the uterus.
That's right.
Just
That's absolutely
FYI,
correct.
if you didn't
Good.
know.
No.
Yeah.
Those are directly reserved for the pineal gland. No, I'm kidding.
Pineal gland.
Pineal gland, really like getting what's not deserved.
Yeah, I know. Really getting a whooping. But yeah.
All right.
Let's go clean family fun. So we talked a little bit about where to find you, but we have a link that we want to do in the description. But if people want to find you on Instagram or other social media, where would they be looking?
Yeah, or if you want to share too, like how you support or what, why people would want to come to you, or
yeah, like what kind of
your
things you
little
offer and all that. Elevator pitch, go. Okay.
Okay, I'm ready.
No
Give me
pressure.
30 seconds. Well, yeah, I would say definitely the best place to find me is on Instagram. My handle is at nourish_with_Renata. That's where I'm sharing daily hormonal tips, nutrition tips, things to keep you reminded about how to help your hormonal balance every single day. I also have a website, which is nourishwithrenata.com, and you can go on there to book a free 20-minute consultation. And in those consultations, we talk about your specific nutrition, your specific hormones, and what challenges you're currently feeling. In addition to that, I have a new program coming out, which is the perfect introduction to hormones. If you're listening to this and you're just like, oh my gosh, I literally have no idea about these hormones and which ones to focus on, Women's Hormones 101 is a mini group program. It's 4 calls. They'll all be recorded. For this first go round, it will honestly be the only time I deliver it live. And then after that, it will be a self-paced video program. So for all of the women that join this first go round, they'll also receive a bonus one-on-one nutrition and strategy session with me, which is valued at $200. And so that is a steal, honestly, to be part of the program and to get one of these strategy sessions too. So that's really going to be helpful, especially as you're starting to learn about your hormones and nutrition. Other than that, it's my one-on-one nutrition energy coaching. So for me, nutrition is not just only about what you put in your body. It's everything. It's your holistic being. It is your mental, emotional health. It's your hormones. It's your happiness. There's so much around our health that we need to consider. It's not just food in a vacuum,
Right.
So definitely reach out to me if you want to know more about my really awesome transformative one-on-one coaching.
Yes, I love it.
That was powerful. Good job. You had that like down to a T. I love it.
She's got it down. When does that Hormone 101, when's it starting? The one that you're doing live?
Yeah, so it actually starts next Wednesday, which is, I believe, the 10th of January.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, not sure
this
when
probably
this is
won't be
air.
out by
yeah, totally
then.
fine.
So
but we
they
will
can
have
join the self-paced thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or your one-on-one, and
exactly.
yeah.
Awesome.
Well, cool. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and sharing your knowledge. And I just love you.
Yeah, you're pretty rad. Keep it up.
Oh, thanks, guys. Thank you for having me. You guys asked amazing questions. And Sam, thanks for letting me come on your show, because I literally was like, oh, I could also be a guest, like if you wanted. Yeah.
Oh, so timid. I'm like, yeah. If you found parts of this podcast interesting, useful, or at the very least entertaining, I hope that you'll share your takeaways and tag me on social media, or leave a review. And we appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.